Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. Can I just say that I am so happy that it's recording day? It's just always a pleasure to get together and talk about mystery, and today, specifically, techno thrillers.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well. Before we begin, Brooke, I just want to mention that our book, Life or Delft, is available for pre order. It's a cozy mystery that we wrote over the last several months.
It's so exciting, Sarah, to have our first collaboration available for pre order. At this point, it's on Amazon, and we'll link that in the show notes. But once it's released, it'll be available at all your favorite vendors. So go out and check it out.
So, when you're reading a mystery, Brooke, technology can set the reader in a specific time. Are the characters pulling a phone from their pocket, or are they picking up the receiver to make a call? Are they checking their day planner, or are they looking something up in a Palm Pilot? As we have integrated technology into our lives, it can play a greater role in mystery. You'll never find the detective asking when a cell phone pinged a tower in a Golden Age mystery. But in modern techno thrillers, they often use technology to drive the story, and it can become almost cautionary tale as the authors speculate how our use of technology might go wrong. These books often cross over into science fiction, incorporating elements of political and spy thrillers, and as we will, I'm sure, discuss, can get into great detail about how technology works. An early example of a techno thriller is The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, the same author of our beloved Sherlock Holmes. This was released in 1912, and there's a very detailed description of a journey in a South American jungle to verify claims of dinosaurs. And it features many of the characteristics that are common in this subgenre. So, technical detail, secrets, adventure. And The Lost World inspired Michael Crichton to write Jurassic Park, and then he titled the sequel to that, Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Um, and Crichton is arguably one of the most recognizable names in the techno thriller space. So I thought, Brooke, that we could start with him.
That sounds great, Sarah. Thank you for that intro summary.
So have you read any Michael Crichton books?
I know that I read Jurassic Park. I read it after seeing the movie because I was, at that age where going to the movies a lot. Um, but here's the kicker for me, Sarah. Like, give me a horror book, vampire, goblins, some creepy supernatural ghost, and I'm totally fine. But these plausible, scary, technological advanced stories scare me to death, and they will keep me up at night. So it's really difficult for me to read in this genre. On the one hand, I love it because I really love technology and science and like the research part of it, but I think that's part of why it's so scary is because I realize that a lot of this is possible.
That is so true. It is very possible. And it's interesting to look back at books that were written, say, in the early 2000s and see what of those predictions have come true. Has it turned into this almost nightmare scenario that the authors were predicting 25 years ago? And in some ways, the answer is yes, right?
Absolutely.
I think you've touched on a great point. A lot of mysteries that we read are not that plausible, right? A caterer is not going to be encountering a body every time they are working a job. But being in an environment that is largely online, where there is a rogue AI, is not
Hmm.
outside the realms of possibility. Certainly, it feels like that in 2025.
Absolutely. Yeah. This week I read a Michael Crichton book, Prey, which was written in 2002. And he has an amazing introduction. I listened to the audiobook and he does the introduction himself. And it's fascinating and wonderful. But he's talking about the fact that there are potential for these nanoparticles to become a rogue virus, which is the crux of the book Prey. And, I'm like feeling like the sweat break out on my forehead because everyone, we lived through 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the experience of that pandemic really shaped the way that we look at these possibilities. And hearing him speak about things that were potential in 2002, that I'm like, oh, that's like real science today in 2025, just gave the book like that much more realism, I guess, when it's supposed to be science fiction.
I read one of his books. Actually, no, it wasn't written by him. It was written by Daniel H. Wilson, and it's Andromeda Evolution, and the it's touted as the sequel to Michael Crichton's book, The Andromeda Strain, and there's a lot of reference to what happened in that first book, um, in this second one. Um, and then I started, but haven't finished reading Micro, which was published after Michael Crichton died, but I think he started the manuscript, and then Richard Preston finished it. And in that book, it's like um, nanotechnology that, yeah, it does not feel like it is that wild of a suggestion.
No, and especially with the proliferation of AI that we've seen over the last 2 years, learning technologies, it is not difficult to imagine some of these rogue AI or rogue, um, you know, computer particles learning and then doing evil things.
So, Brooke, we've talked a little bit about techno thrillers featuring AI. I recently read a book by Lincoln Child called Chrysalis, which is, I think it's part of a series that he writes, but I read it as a standalone and it was fine. You didn't need to have read any of the previous books. Um, and his name may be familiar because he often co writes with Douglas Preston, a series featuring Pendergrast. Anyway, this book, Chrysalis, features wearable technology and it being manipulated to harm the wearers. And, I can see in our near future that being something that is really pushed on us, shifting us from using our phones to interact with the internet and AI and using wearable technology. So it was, when you talk about being a little bit scared of these books, it was in that sense a little scary.
Yeah, just hearing you say that kind of made my pulse rate increase a little bit. I think about our kids, I think about what is the world going to be like when our kids are 20, 30, 40, but what gets me through when I have that little spike of worry and fear in these stories is that we're reading crime fiction. And I always tell myself, the good guys are going to win in the end. There's going to be justice. There's going to be resolution. And usually there is. And I hope that's the case for real life as well, Sarah.
I, a while ago, read Origin by Dan Brown, and that was published in 2017. And I actually read it in 2021. Just speaking about the pandemic, I was unable to read very much during the pandemic. And I can remember one day saying, okay, I need to get out of this slump. I looked on my library's app. I hadn't ever listened to an audiobook, but I chose this one because it was by Dan Brown and I was familiar with, the Da Vinci Code and other books that he'd written. So I thought, okay, if nothing else, this is going to be a thriller and it's just going to keep me entertained for a couple of hours, right? And it's the book that got me out of my reading slump. So it was the first audiobook that I listened to, and
Wow.
it got me back into reading after that first year of the pandemic. And it features an AI entity. And again, this was published in 2017. So he was, very much forecasting the way that this might
Mm-hmm.
that this might evolve. And it was this personal assistant entity, and there's a tech bro involved, and it feels, at the time, it didn't feel as aged as sometimes these books can, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the technology that is described sounds very incredible for the time, but then you read it 5 years later and you're like, no, whatever, man, we've all got that. Like, and it's not been that bad. Um, but I thought, in 2021 when I read it, that it stood out. You think about The Net by the film with Sandra Bullock that came out in 1995. So that was 30 years ago, just when we were being introduced to using the internet, right? And the premise was this woman lives at home and does nothing except for lives her life online, which at the time seemed very novel, but is quite frankly how most of us live our lives right now. I haven't watched it probably since 95 or 96, but I wonder if it would stand up.
I thought of that movie too. I saw that in the movie theater, and in 1995, I was in college and did not have the internet. There were a few computers in a specific lab that you could go to that sort of kind of had some dial up, but there was nothing on the internet. So that movie felt extremely science fiction to the original audience, but it doesn't today. As you said, that's how most of us live our life. But I do think it would be worth a rewatch to see, if nothing else, just for the nostalgia. Remember when life used to be like that?
And just speaking about AI, Daniel Kalla, who was a former guest on our show, just released a book. I haven't read it yet, but it's called The Deepest Fake, and it's about AI. And I'm sure it would be a very interesting read.
Absolutely. I think that there are some of these techno thrillers that are and some that aren't actually crime fiction, because some of them are just kind of suspenseful science fiction tales, aren't they? Like, there's
Hmm.
not a bad guy, there's not a villain trying to do something, but in many of them there are. One company steals another company's technology in order to do something malicious with it. Um, and those kinds of crimes. And sometimes there is actually a murder mystery within, because maybe someone's trying to stop that malicious activity. But I think sometimes the larger crime that is woven into these stories are more like crimes against humanity, doing something that is so unethical and short-sighted.
I think that's a great observation, Brooke. And I think those kinds of stories uh, are more I can think of examples that are more like political thrillers. And an example of that is Enemy of the State, the 1998 film with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. And that is really about how the government can track people, which, is something that people are, for the most part, not very comfortable with. Another more recent example of that is Zero Day, which it was a series that was on Netflix earlier this year, starring Robert De Niro. And uh, it involves more of a cybercrime kind of story, but again, is government and government influence on the information that people have. And I enjoyed watching that. Um, and uh, Cory Doctorow has a series. It's the Little Brother novels. I've read one of the books set in that world that was lots of detail about cybercrime and hacking from the um, hacker's point of view. In trying to defend against government surveillance, and I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, those are all great examples. And I'm glad you brought up Enemy of the State. It's a classic. And it's an example of what you mentioned at the beginning of a locked network. It's an example of the modern day locked room mystery where it's, not picking locks or trying to decide how someone shut themselves in and then the crime was committed, but cracking surveillance systems and IP addresses and things like that. It's the same conundrum, but high tech.
That's a great description, Brooke. So I have a nonfiction example, and that is Tracers in the Dark by Andy Greenberg, who he is a reporter editor for Wired magazine, and he does a really great job of explaining technology in a way that the layperson can understand. So this book is around crime around cryptocurrency, which cryptocurrency may be something that people don't really understand very well. And he does, like I said, a very good job of explaining the way that the criminal element takes advantage of blockchain and cryptocurrency. Um, and it does read a bit like a thriller, but it is nonfiction. I will say that there are some pretty terrible things that people get up to, and he doesn't get into a lot of detail, but he mentions some of them, and so it may not be for everybody. I think there's a warning before those chapters, but it I enjoyed it for just feeling like I was learning something.
Oh, that's great. I love the true crime connection to any of our topics. Well, you mentioned Zero Day, which is a film with Robert De Niro, but one of my recent techno thriller reads was Zero Days by Ruth Ware, and this came out in 2023. And it centers on a near future cybercrime scenario, which these penetration testers, they're essentially hackers, ethical hackers that are hired to break into physical and digital spaces to expose security flaws. And it was really good. It was such a departure for Ruth Ware as well to be in this more techno thriller space, but it was really interesting and really great.
Oh, I very much enjoyed that book when I read it. It's definitely a good example of a book in this space.
I think one of the reasons I liked it was it really reminded me of one of my all-time favorite movies, which I never made the connection that we would really be considering a techno thriller in this, but it's Sneakers, which is a 1992 film. I'm really showing my age on this episode, you guys. It's a caper thriller with technology woven in. The star is Robert Redford, but it's a ensemble cast with Dan Aykroyd, Ben Kingsley, River Phoenix, and these are a group of security specialists that are also hired to penetrate into a company in order to steal a black box. But they realize that the job is much more involved and there's a big conspiracy going on. It's so good. Have you seen that one, Sarah?
I have, Brooke, and I probably saw it close to when it came out in 1992 and really enjoyed it. And I wonder if it would stand up now because it like technology was involved, and obviously it would have been technology of the early 1990s. Um, but I think the themes remain, and that's true. I actually think of a lot of the books in this genre, right? Whether the technology may not be something that is current now, but the themes of that fear of whether it's government manipulation or companies manipulating us or just technology taking a wrong turn, uh, those are persistent.
Absolutely. And that's what draws us to these types of stories, isn't it? Like we like to be a little bit scared, which is like kind of the name of the game in all of crime fiction and definitely a solid marker in techno thrillers.
Well, Brooke, it has been so fun to discuss techno thrillers with you. And, maybe this is something that we will revisit in future as technology evolves.
That's right. We'll be looking back to 2025 and laughing at the things that we thought were high tech, Sarah. But for today, thanks for joining us, listeners, on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, and get mystery news, podcast updates, and bonus episodes. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.